The training grounds at Camp Pendleton stretched out under a scorching California sun, the heat waves rising off the baked earth and shimmering like ghosts. Rows of targets lined the distant ridges, some at 200 meters, others at 500. Beyond that, the terrain melted into rolling hills where only the sharpest shooters dared to set their sights. The air carried the sharp tang of gunpowder, punctuated by bursts of automatic fire and the clipped voices of drill instructors barking corrections. It was just another day for the young Marines: sweat, dust, and weapons. They were tough, loud, and brimming with the kind of confidence only youth could carry. They leaned on their rifles between drills, sharing jokes, teasing one another, and boasting about accuracy and kill counts in training exercises. That's when they saw him. An old man in a faded, sun-bleached uniform walked slowly up the dirt path leading to the range. His posture was proud, though stiff, his steps deliberate, as though each one carried the weight of years. His boots were scuffed, his trousers creased, and his jacket bore patches whose colors had long faded. What caught everyone's eye, though, wasn't his uniform. It was the rifle slung over his shoulder. It wasn't black, like the M4s or M27s the Marines carried. It wasn't sleek and modern, with rails, optics, or suppressors. No, it was bright orange. Its paint was chipped, worn in places to bare steel, but unmistakably orange from buttstock to barrel. The weapon looked almost like a relic from a bygone hunting season, a tool too outdated to stand alongside the carbon fiber precision rifles the Marines prided themselves on. The laughter began immediately. "Hey, Grandpa," one Marine shouted, his voice carrying easily across the hot air. "Halloween's months away." Another added, "What is that thing, a Nerf gun? Planning to scare off some squirrels?" A ripple of laughter spread through the group, young voices carrying the edge of mockery that soldiers use when they feel superior. The old man ignored them. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, were fixed on the range ahead. His weathered face didn't twitch, his jaw didn't clench. He simply walked with the same calm pace, as though he had heard the same laughter 1,000 times before. When he reached the benches near the firing line, he carefully set down the rifle. His hands, though lined and calloused, moved with deliberate precision, almost reverence. He pulled a rag from his pocket and began wiping down the scope, polishing it as though the world beyond had disappeared. The Marines, gathered nearby, exchanged amused glances. One of them leaned closer to his buddy and muttered, "Look at him, he probably thinks he's in some old western." "Yeah," the other replied, smirking. "Doesn't even know what century it is." The drill instructor, a broad-shouldered sergeant with a deep voice, finally walked over. He'd been listening to the chatter with one eyebrow raised. Something about the old man tugged at his memory, though he couldn't place it. "All right, old man," the sergeant said gruffly, though without mockery. "You got a target in mind? Or are you just here to polish that, whatever that is?" The veteran lifted his head slowly, his eyes piercing beneath the brim of his cap. For a long moment, he didn't speak, simply scanning the range as if measuring every distance, every gust of wind, every mirage of heat rising off the ground. Finally, he lifted a weathered finger and pointed. Far beyond the furthest target, nearly lost in the shimmer of the horizon, stood a small metal plate fixed to a ridge. It was so distant that even the younger Marines squinted to make it out. Some of them couldn't even see it at all. 4,000 meters, one Marine muttered, incredulous. "That's not even on the range chart." Another snorted. "That's impossible. Even with the best sniper rigs, that's just luck. No way he's hitting that with his orange toy." The laughter rose again, though it carried a sharper edge now, not just mockery, but defense. The very idea that someone could attempt a 4,000-meter shot challenged everything they believed about their own skill and their modern weapons. The old man didn't respond. He simply adjusted the scope, checked the chamber, and lowered himself into position on the bench. His movements were slow but steady, practiced with the fluidity of repetition honed over decades. The range fell silent, the laughter trailing off into murmurs. Despite themselves, the young Marines leaned forward, watching. Even mockery couldn't fully drown out the quiet weight of anticipation. The veteran's breathing slowed, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm older than the men around him. His finger rested lightly on the trigger, not pressing, not rushing. He waited, eyes locked through the scope, patient as a predator. "Come on," one Marine whispered. "This is gonna be good. He'll miss by a mile." Another chuckled. "Yeah, watch that orange stick blow apart in his hands." But their voices faltered as the old man exhaled, his entire body becoming still, as if time itself paused with him. Then, the shot rang out. It wasn't a stuttering burst of automatic fire, but a single crack, sharp and clean, rolling across the training grounds like a whip. The bullet sliced the air, vanishing into the distance where even the keenest eyes couldn't follow. The silence that followed was suffocating. The Marines held their breath. And then, faint but undeniable, came the sound, clang. The steel plate on the ridge quivered, a small puff of dust rising as the impact echoed across the hills. The impossible shot had landed. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The Marines, jaws hung open, eyes wide in disbelief. What the hell? One finally whispered. No way, another muttered. That's 4,000 meters. Before the shock had settled, a second sound pierced the air, loud alarms blaring from the control tower of the range. Red lights flashed. The shot had been picked up by military field sensors, flagged as an anomaly. It wasn't just the Marines who had witnessed it. Somewhere beyond the range, someone important had been alerted. And within minutes, the sound of a vehicle engine rumbled across the training grounds. An armored SUV pulled up, and out stepped a general in full-dress uniform, flanked by aides. His presence was enough to make every Marine snap to attention. But his eyes weren't on them. They were fixed on the old man with the orange rifle. The general's boots crunched against the gravel as he strode toward the firing line, his entourage of aides scrambling to keep up. His stern face was unreadable, but his eyes stayed locked on the old veteran with the orange rifle. The Marines, who only minutes ago had been laughing, now stood rigid at attention, throats dry and hearts pounding. None dared speak. The veteran rose slowly from his bench, his joints creaking but his posture straight. He slung the orange rifle back across his shoulder as though nothing unusual had happened. To him, it had been just another shot, an extension of muscle memory, breath control, and instinct sharpened by decades. The general stopped just a few feet away. Silence pressed down on the group like a heavy blanket. Even the wind seemed to still. Finally, the general spoke, his voice deep, carrying authority that made the air itself vibrate. Who made that shot? The drill instructor, still stunned himself, raised a hand and pointed. Sir, it was him. The general's gaze narrowed on the old man. He studied him carefully, his eyes flicking from the faded insignia on his jacket to the weathered features of his face. There was recognition there, though faint, like trying to recall a name from an old dream. That distance, the general said slowly, almost to himself. 4,000 meters, it's not supposed to be possible. Not here. Not under these conditions. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Where did you learn to shoot like that? The veteran finally looked at him directly. His voice was gravelly, calm, but carried a weight that silenced even the aides who were scribbling notes. In places you'd rather not visit, General, he said. With brothers you'll never forget. For a moment, the words hung in the air, heavy and haunting. The Marines shifted uneasily, suddenly aware that the man standing before them wasn't just some old-timer with a painted gun. He was someone forged in fire they could barely imagine. The general's face softened, just slightly. He extended his hand. You've just proven every man here wrong, including me. The veteran's handshake was firm, steady despite the years. The general turned to the Marines, who stood frozen with guilt and shame. Line up, he barked. Now. They scrambled into formation, boots slamming into the dirt, rifles snapped to their sides. Salute. The drill instructor commanded, his voice louder than it had been all day. Dozens of young Marines lifted their hands to their brows, their eyes locked on the old veteran. The same men who had mocked him now burned with shame, their cheeks flushed, their pride stripped bare. The veteran, however, didn't bask in the moment. He didn't smile. He didn't even acknowledge the salute for more than a passing nod. He quietly began packing his rifle case, carefully disassembling the orange weapon and placing each piece with the care of a craftsman. To him, respect was never the goal. The rifle wasn't for show, and neither was he. The general, still watching, finally asked, why orange? Why paint a rifle like that? The veteran zipped the case and looked up. His eyes, clouded yet sharp, carried a hint of sorrow. Because after the war, I wasn't hunting men anymore. I was hunting deer. Elk, wild boar. Out there, the orange kept other hunters from mistaking me for a target. And it reminded me that a weapon is only as dangerous as the man behind it. The Marines shifted again, the weight of his words hitting harder than any lecture from their instructors. One young Marine, unable to contain himself, blurted out, "Sir, who are you?" The drill instructor turned sharply, ready to bark at him for speaking out of turn, but the general raised a hand. His eyes were still fixed on the old man, waiting. The veteran sighed, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "Names don't matter. But once, long ago, I was a rifleman. Then a sniper. Then just a man trying to make it home alive." He paused, his voice tightening. "I've watched men take their last breath through this scope. I've heard laughter turn to screams in an instant. That's what you carry when you talk about shots like that one." The silence deepened, pressing into the skin of every Marine there. The laughter that had once filled the air seemed obscene now, as distant as childhood. They weren't looking at a relic anymore. They were looking at a man who had given pieces of his soul so they could stand there in uniform today. The general finally spoke. "Son, I don't know what brought you here, but I'm glad it did." These men needed a reminder. They think technology makes a Marine. That fancy rifles and high-tech scopes make them lethal. But what you've shown today, he glanced back at the shaken young soldiers, is that discipline, patience, and skill are timeless. And they will always outmatch arrogance. The veteran nodded once, then lifted his case. "That's all I came for." And with that, he turned and began walking back down the dirt path. No fanfare, no grand speech, just the slow, steady steps of a man who had already carried enough memories for 10 lifetimes. The Marines stood at attention until he disappeared beyond the hill. When the general finally dismissed them, no one spoke. The air was thick with unspoken thoughts, each Marine privately reckoning with the lesson they had just witnessed. One finally whispered to another, his voice barely audible. "Who was that guy?" The drill instructor, arms crossed, didn't take his eyes off the horizon. His voice was quiet, but it carried a gravity none of them would forget. "A legend you'll be telling stories about long after he's gone." For the rest of the day, the range felt different. Every shot fired echoed with the weight of the old veteran's presence. Every Marine aimed more carefully, breathed more steadily, thought more deeply about the responsibility in their hands. The orange rifle was gone, but its echo remained, a symbol not of ridicule, but of mastery. A reminder that true skill isn't bound by age, technology, or time. It lives on in those who carry the discipline to use it wisely. And somewhere beyond the hills, the old veteran walked quietly, content. He hadn't come for glory. He hadn't come to prove them wrong. He had come for one reason only, to make sure the next generation understood that the deadliest weapon on any battlefield was never the gun itself. It was the man behind it.